Uh, yeah. RPG a Day 2017, and it's day 17. So the question is, which RPG have you owned the longest but not played? Um, I mentioned before that I started the hobby when I was around 13. I think I was, 13 in seventh grade. And around that time was also when I first encountered anime. Well, the first that I encountered anime knowing it's a distinct style with a very specific type of cliches and stylistic, ways of presenting stuff and whatnot. Because I had watched Pokemon earlier, and I had watched Silver Fang and stuff like that, not realizing it was like a distinct Japanese style that has like these features and stuff. And around the time I was 13, one of my big brothers borrowed a bunch of anime movies from a friend of his, which included stuff like Ghost in the Shell, Fist of the North Star, the Street Fighter 2 animated film, and Ninja Scroll. And this became like an instant favorite. And thinking about a 13-year-old boy, wonder why this became favorite. If you've seen the movie, uh, but no, apart from the boobies, there was also a lot of stuff I really loved about it. The kind of ninja fantasy, it was something that up until that point, I had always known the kind of cliches and the tropes of, this kind of King Arthur like fantasy, this kind of Tolkien fantasy of orcs, elves, dwarves, whatnot, and swords and sorcery and this stuff, Conan the Barbarian, all that stuff with basic wizards and, dudes with, shining armors or bulging muscles and big ass swords and all sorts of like European influences and stuff. And so when I became kind of knowledgeable about role playing games, and I tried my first games that were like, I think my first game was first game was D&D third edition, and the game after that was uh, I think it was Dark Ages Vampire, actually. But yeah, when I went out and I got my very first role playing game book, it's a book I've never gotten to play. I was infatuated with Ninja Scroll, and when I browsed through the shelves in the gaming store, my eyes landed on this D&D, the Oriental Adventures. And if you look at like stuff there's a neat little folded map here of all sorts of cool stuff. When you see the book and you see this sort of stuff in it, like you see this sort of stuff and you start to hear shamisen music in your head and you start to think of stuff like Nani, just all this stuff, when you're kind of when you come face to face with that, you're of course immediately infatuated with it. And when you look at this, and there's all the familiar stuff of character classes and races, but they're different stuff. They're like all of a sudden samurais and ninjas and stuff like that. And I was really getting big into that stuff around that time. But it turns out that at that time, a lot of my friends, even though they liked ninjas and stuff, they found the Oriental setting kind of intimidating. I didn't think about it too much at the time, but all of my players were kind of like, oh, it feels like I need to know a huge ton of cultural information about this setting. It's like anybody can jump into like something that's kind of Tolkien, this type of thing, but immediately when you pull out something that's based in kind of feudal Japan, everybody starts to think about this huge social etiquette code that they would have to like really be in sync with, and kind of think of what is honorable and what is not honorable, what is considered polite, what is not considered polite, and what is impolite enough to where somebody is somebody feels that they can slice you down with a sword and the law won't get involved in that and stuff like that. You know, it's all sorts of stuff like that started to fly around, and I was like, I never even thought about that. And later on, the more I've watched stuff like, you know, samurai movies and stuff, you know, unless you're like really focusing on like nobility and the household stuff, if you're playing like you know, I don't know, the wife of a nobleman or something like that, really the etiquette stuff isn't that important. It's mostly important if your campaign is going to be focusing on that. And you can always say, you know, I know it's not something that helps with immersion and stuff, but if you don't know, you can just say that my character does the expected thing according to the etiquette of the local culture stuff, and you know, let the either the DM describe it or just kind of fly past that by saying you do that. And if it's something very important, you can roll for it. You know, roll something having to do with social etiquette. You know, in the World of Darkness, modern World of Darkness games, you know, it even has a skill called etiquette. You know, so I think if people were kind of making a bigger issue of that than they should have. But I've heard that same concern being thrown around even in my adult days, having already become like a experienced role player. So I don't know why people are so concerned about that. Later on, when I tried to kind of get people interested in it, I kind of got the actual info dump of what the story behind that game is, and I got to find out about Legend of the Five Rings, and to find out that the game you've bought, kind of, you know, people won't want to play it because it's an offshoot. It's a D&D rules version of an actual game that has an established fan base and people that love it, and it's a mechanic that works well. And in the D&D mechanic, it becomes clunky and stuff. It's just kind of, you know, what can you expect when somebody goes and buys their first role-playing book? And for the longest time, it was also that I had only that book. It requires to have the player's guide and the player's handbook and the dungeon master's guide and the even the monster manual if you don't want to use the monsters in that. And most of the monsters in that are like high-level monsters, so you know you can't win. So yeah. Sadly, Oriental Adventures was one of those games. It still is. You know, I've never gotten around to running it. And as soon as I got it, and as soon as I saw the reactions people had, and as soon as I realized that I need the other books, I went and bought Werewolf the Wild West, and that became actually the first game I ever ran. You know, and that was like my second book I ever bought. But yeah. I still love the ninja stuff. Actually, I have this little tradition whenever I travel by train. If the trip is longer than an hour and a half, I usually go to YouTube where somebody has uploaded an entire shitty 80s ninja movie. You know, I tend to watch stuff like Power of Ninjutsu or Ninja Terminator and stuff like that. And it's horrendous, you know, but it's like ninjas. That's all I need. So yeah, see you tomorrow.